in a universe far, far away? Is it Star Wars? Is it Star Trek? What side are you on? Can you be on both sides? That's what we're talking about today. So, Wes, Star Wars or Star Trek?
Today I'm going to have to say Star Trek. You like them both, but one is superior to the other depending on what kind of person you are.
Of course.
So you can like Star Wars and Star Trek, but at the end of the day, I think you're going to take a position.
Well, my position is Star Wars.
Well, tell me why.
There's so many reasons. The number one reason for me that I choose Star Wars over Star Trek is the quality of the visual. On our last episode, we talked about TV shows and sets. And Star Trek was an example we used of sets and how it's just 5 rooms in a studio somewhere. Where Star Wars, outside of some animated stuff and some new things on Disney Plus, has always been theatrical. So it's bigger budget, bigger money in special effects, so everything just looks nicer.
It's no secret that Star Wars, special effects wise, looks better than Star Trek. Star Trek is notorious for being hokey. The original series, it is the hokiest show you will watch for its popularity.
I can agree with that.
Everything looks fake. For the most part, the acting is centered around William Shatner, and William Shatner is not that great of an actor.
Is he not really a great actor? Sorry, that's my really bad Shatner impersonation.
All right, so while Star Wars might look better to the eyes, I think Star Trek hits you more in the feels. A lot better than Star Wars. Star Wars is Camelot with light swords.
It's basically style versus substance.
Okay.
I have heard it said by more than one person, including my wife, who is more of a Star Trek fan, that it's science versus religion, which I tend to disagree with, but I know where she's coming from with that. But Star Wars is pretty. Star Trek makes you think.
All right.
Now, you can kind of cross lines with both of those, but that's kind of what it boils down to.
Well, look, I can put Star Wars in at any given time, start a Star Wars movie, stream it with the family, have it on in the background. I'm not going to pay that much attention to it because I get it. I know what's going on. It's an adventure. The good guys are going to win. There's going to be some sword play, some good special effects. Star Trek, on the other hand, most of the time if I watch it, I usually want to watch it, when it's quiet so I can hear the dialogue a little bit better. Yes, there's a lot of science. The conversation is a little bit more intellectual.
So the way I'm reading that is you can put on a Star Wars movie or just say you turn your TV on and there's one playing on TBS. And you could look at it for a minute and know within a minute which movie you're watching or one of the shows.
Sure.
Like you could put it on and be like, oh, that's episode 3. Cool. All right. And walk away. Whereas Star Trek, you put Star Trek on, whether it be original, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, whatever. You're like, oh, you can tell which show it is, but unless you're seeing a bunch of tribbles or some specific guest star or something, you don't have to watch and pay attention to see where you're at in that show.
Yeah, but you're comparing 11 movies to over 2,000 episodes of a television series.
You have to pay attention to see where the conversation is to know what's going on.
I mean,
but you can glance at Star Wars and know exactly what's going on.
What I'm hearing is that Star Trek is a think piece for people who want to be stimulated, and Star Wars is just a movie that can play in the background when you take the kids to McDonald's.
Obviously, if you've seen it, most people who watch Star Wars have seen all the movies multiple times. However, there is an exception to that for myself. Episode 9, saw it once, ain't been back for seconds as of yet.
I remember I went to the theater with my grandfather to see one of the Jurassic Park movies. And one of the trailers that hit was Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
And I remember there was this energy in the theater, this excitement. You were in that everybody had the same feeling because Star Wars represented this magical part of everybody. I will say that. Star Wars is magical.
It is.
But then I saw Phantom Menace.
Probably of all the Star Wars movies, Phantom Menace takes more shit than any of them. Even though there are worse movies in the universe than that, it takes the brunt of the hate because of Kid Anakin, but more so Jar Jar fucking Binks.
You know, for me, it is Jar Jar Binks, but I am not a fan of the pod race. I think it takes up too much time.
It takes up way too much time. All of the negative side of episode 1. I have a good friend of mine named Randy that's a big Star Wars fan. And his biggest thing is the lightsabers and lightsaber duels. He collected a lot of the toys, but he only bought characters that had a lightsaber with them. And his whole argument about Phantom Menace, he says, yeah, you can knock it all you want. Got the best lightsaber fight in the entire series. However, that was before episode 3 came out. He said that.
I was just about to say Anakin versus Obi-Wan.
That at the time that was said, that wasn't out. So
now, fight choreography, you know, I'm going to have to take a knee. There is no fight choreography in Star Trek.
No.
Everybody palm punches. Okay, yeah. I'm not going to defend the palm punch. Exactly. Huh. You know, Worf, security chief, supposed to be the baddest dude on the ship. You consistently see him get his ass kicked. I'm not going to defend him either. But when it comes to story quality and the richness of the characters, okay, I'll give you a prime example of Star Trek versus Star Wars for me. Most alien race languages in Star Wars, I said most, not all, they're very guttural, you know, a lot of ooh, da da ba, da 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 ba ba ba. And then they just translate it, and that's cool. Clicks and spinnies and blah, blah, blah. That's fine. They developed whole languages, actual languages that you can say in English or basic as it is in the sci-fi world that we can understand. We can understand them say these words, but yet the way they developed it in an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 5, called Darmok, they develop a Tamarian language for a race of aliens, obviously called the Tamarians, for one episode. But it is an entire, coherent, fluid language that you could seemingly decipher. They speak in metaphor. Everything. And what's so great about that episode then is that it was smart. It made you have to think. You know, you were learning along with the characters. And I think learning goes hand in hand with Star Trek. You know, it's a show that is steeped in education. Even if it's super science and the education for the most part isn't real, they still pull from theories and hypotheses from modern day and apply them to super science for the future. So even something, you know, like the minutia of developing an alien language for a single...
So look, you know, I get all that. You know, Star Trek, it's like you say, a think piece, you know, and to put it bluntly, you know, Star Trek's for adults and Star Wars is for kids, more or less. Now, that doesn't mean that adults and kids aren't going to watch both. What Star Wars comes differently at, you know, you're not going to get as much of the deep thought and any kind of realistic science, because that's not happening. But you get aliens that look like aliens, not dudes wearing a mask, you know? You get grand universes. And yes, none of it's based in any kind of science or reality, but it's the imagination of it is massive.
Now, when you talk about men in latex masks, I mean, obviously you're referring to the original series of Next Generation, because I would say as early as Season 3, Deep Space Nine, special effects had hit a turning point, and a lot of the aliens in Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and even the new Star Trek movies, the aliens look good and fresh. Now, I know some people don't like the current look of the Klingons, but you have to say, they look a lot better than Michael Dorn in a latex piece.
Well, and that boils down to this day and age having two aspects: more money and better special effects. One thing George Lucas has always done is been ahead of everybody when it comes to special effects and CGI. And I don't know that anybody can argue that. I mean, half the movies I've ever seen in my life in the theater say THX at the beginning of it. I mean, like that dude pioneered special effects and sound and visual.
I agree that Lucas and his team developed new techniques in the field that nobody had ever thought about before.
Where George Lucas messed up is if he had just created the special effects houses and told somebody his ideas and visions and then let that person make Star Wars, I don't even know we'd be having an argument right now.
Well, look, when you talk about, vision, George Lucas started out with a much broader scope for Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
But he was convinced, bullied, or just got the idea himself that it would be better to condense his world down in the beginning to the point where he scrapped characters or combined characters to create one character. Gene Roddenberry, when he developed Star Trek, would not budge. He had to have the cast diverse. He had to tell the stories in a certain way. For the time, he wanted to talk about issues. He had to dress them up as science fiction because only as science fiction, only as aliens disputing the question of race could we show that in our country on television. But he was trying to talk about stories and things that impacted us in reality, but he just dressed them up in science fiction. So that's where Star Trek comes from.
I mean, Star Trek is always going to be more grounded in reality than Star Wars ever will be. I mean, Star Wars is not meant to be.
I mean, yeah. I get that Star Wars is a fairy tale.
It is. And part of that is also kind of why I say it's more for kids. The themes and the things which you're talking about are more adult-centric themes. Even though a kid can watch Star Trek and appreciate it, I know because I did when I was a kid. When OG Star Trek is all there was, and a couple of the movies, that's what I watched. All I knew was Captain James T. Kirk and his crew of merry bandits. And, I appreciated it for what it was as a kid, but, those themes were over my head.
That's funny you say that. When I was a kid, I was less entertained by Star Trek, and I was definitely more of a Star Wars guy.
Well, so for me, not to interrupt, but I wasn't a Star Wars kid. Nobody in my family watched Star Wars, and it's weird. The town I grew up in, I guess there just wasn't enough nerds there. And although I was aware of Star Wars, it was not until the re-releases in 1997 before I became a Star Wars fan.
Well, you say that, you didn't grow up around a lot of nerds, so you didn't have, that induction into the fandom early.
I did not.
So you got into it later.
Whereas Star Trek was just on my TV.
When I got older and I didn't have a whole lot of friends and I would come home from school, Star Trek would be on. It was syndicated on Fox, I do believe. And because their personalities come out, in every episode, by the end of Star Trek, you get to where these people and, you almost feel like they're your friends when you don't have any.
I can totally see that because Star Wars does not have that. It's a tale of, deep down, it's a tale of a couple of people in one family. It's Anakin, it's Luke, and then it's Rey, which is a slight offshoot, although she claims to be a Skywalker.
It's Godfather in space.
Yeah. But you can't relate to these people. Maybe, I suppose, an adolescent girl in middle school could relate to Anakin Skywalker, a la episode 2 and 3, because he's such a whiny bitch. I mean, you might have people claim they relate to Han Solo, but that's just people thinking they're cool when they're really not.
Star Trek was able to take a android that did not have emotions and a engineer with social anxiety, put those two characters together, and they developed this unique friendship which very much the heart and soul of Star Trek The Next Generation. These characters loved each other. And we're talking about an emotionless robot and reading Rainbow. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful story. You know, I hear, and I've even said myself that LeVar Burton's character, Geordi LaForge, was the only character on Star Trek with no game. I mean, he lit, like, anytime he was around a woman, he fumbled. But you know what? His love story was not about, you know, the love of his life. The love of Geordi's life was Data, his best friend. It was a beautiful story.
Right. And that also makes another reason why Star Trek's going to be more of a relatable kind of thing. But Star Wars is and always has been just fantasy. I will say this though, and I'm going to ask you a question to lead into this. Who would you say, over the course of all of Star Wars, who's the main character?
Luke Skywalker.
I disagree.
Okay.
It's fucking R2-D2.
Just because a character is in every iteration of a story does not make them the protagonist. He's the constant. I'll give you that.
R2 is a constant, but if you go back and actually spend the time and pay attention to how influential R2-D2 is to the story, and C-3PO to a slightly lesser degree, if they're not there, that story ends at the beginning because they push that plot in every way with just little bits and boops and beeps all the way to the end.
So by your rationale, the main character of Star Trek is the ship's computer. Majel Barrett providing that voice was a mainstay. It was very comforting to the audience, to the point where they tried to change the voice of the computer for Deep Space Nine. Now, this is before the internet was a big thing. This is when fans had to write in and call in and be part of fan clubs and write into magazines. The Trekkies, as it were, hated the voice of the new computer so much that they actually brought Majel Barrett back and explained it in a storyline
to make it make sense.
To make it make sense. So if you're talking constant, yes, R2-D2, but very much for Star Trek, the voice of the ship's computer. Enterprise versus Falcon. What's more recognizable?
Man, that's tough. Because those are both pretty recognizable. I'm going to give it to the Falcon by the slimmest of margins because of that weird shape. With the cockpit on one side and the notch in the front, which, is because it's a freighter. It's basically a barge.
So your argument is that the Falcon is more oddly shaped than the USS Enterprise?
It's at least, it's symmetrical, left to right. That's what makes the Millennium Falcon weird, because it's not. And I think that's what gives it the edge. But they're both very, very unique. The average person could look at the image and tell you at least what it's from. Both of them, I feel like, are, in the grand scheme of things, and this is something I actually critique in a lot of sci-fi, they don't seem very, what's the word I want to say here? Practical. Neither one of them seems very practical. And that's a problem I see with a lot of ships in a lot of sci-fi. They don't seem like that thing would hold together shaped like that.
So what you're saying is it'd be better off for a spaceship to be shaped like a cock.
Not necessarily.
So
Bezos.
So recognizability, if that's a word, that aside, obviously the Enterprise is a superior ship. All starships from Star Trek are superior spaceships to the Millennium Falcon or any other ship in Star Wars.
Well, no, I don't know about all that, but because there are plenty of ships in both universes, but I mean, in Star Trek, is it the Borg that have a square ship that just floats through space?
It's more efficient.
Shit. I completely disagree there.
Well, look, just like Federation starships, okay? The amenities alone make them superior ships.
Dude,
I don't have to land a starship to go down to a planet. I can beam down.
well, although beaming exists where it doesn't in Star Wars, a Star Destroyer, for the most part, typically doesn't land either.
You
But that
know,
also houses about 600 to 700 other ships on that ship.
look, I don't have to eat military rations from a Star Destroyer on a starship. I can go to a replicator and order a hot meal.
Again, you're getting into really out there science that, obviously is unrealistic.
Look, in order to be on a fancy ship in the world of Star Wars, you have to be a space Nazi. I, on the other hand, could book a ship on the Enterprise and just cruise around with the Starfleet for a few months and then go back to space dock.
But see, that's the thing, though. Star Wars is not just the Empire or the Republic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are all the little poor starving children on the desert planet, are they having a good life while the Millennium Falcon sits there and rots in the desert?
But see, that's the thing, though. That's just one planet. There are literally thousands of habitable planets in the Star Wars
Look, other than
universe.
Vegas land, every other planet I've ever seen is a shithole. Swamp places,
Naboo?
lava places. Oh, Naboo? Sure, it's nice and green, but I've got to share the place with the fucking Gungans. Look, Jar Jar Binks is fucking annoying.
Look, man, I'm not gonna defend Jar Jar Binks. Look, the character could have been fine, but the way they made him sound so just incredibly stupid with the Misa, like that's terrible. Like, George, if you ever hear this, man, I don't know what the hell you were thinking. Jar Jar is the most annoying character probably ever created.
I was just about to ask you, is there a character in the Star Trek universe that even remotely touches as annoying as Jar Jar Binks was in Star Wars?
I don't know if there's a character in any medium ever made quite as annoying
Oh,
as Jar Jar
has
Binks.
has anything in Star Trek been as damaging to the universe as Jar Jar Binks was to Star Wars back when the prequels came out?
Captain Kirk's sex drive.
You know, Captain Kirk did not have as much sex on the original series as everybody likes to talk about. You know how many on-screen romances, and when I say romances, I mean fucking. You know how many times that actually happened on Star Trek?
I actually do not know.
Twice with Kirk. Spock got more booty than Captain Kirk did from the original series.
Spock was awesome, though.
Spock is exact. Thank you for making my point. Spock is awesome. But
Look, when I watched it as a kid, and even in later on watching it, like, Spock was always my favorite character. Like, Vulcans were cool because it's like your emotions be damned. It's meaningless to me.
well, I think they tried to recapture that magic with Data, and
That's exactly what they were trying to do.
in many ways it worked. I mean, they were two totally different characters because Spock did have emotions; he just suppressed them. Is Obi-Wan Kenobi any different than Merlin? Is Luke Skywalker any different than Arthur? I mean, I see a lot of Mordred in Darth Vader.
Speaking of Darth Vader, want to get on a character kick for you. Darth Vader, as Darth Vader, possibly the coolest character ever created. Not just of a visual aspect, but just in how the original version of him was so menacing. I would even gander to say that back in the day when that first came out, little kids that saw that had nightmares about Darth Vader. Like, they woke up screaming in their sleep thinking Darth Vader was going to come get them.
I've heard kids. I've heard that kids had nightmares because of Darth Vader.
I haven't, but it wouldn't shock me. The first 6 movies is the tale of Darth Vader. I believe. Anakin from a kid all the way up to becoming Vader and then, dying at the end of 6 with his sort of redemption. It's a tale been told a million times. but not with the black helmet and the.
Darth Vader epitomizes the archetype of the Black Knight.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful character, and I 100% agree that Star Wars, at least the original movies and prequel, are definitely the story of Anakin Skywalker. Mm-hmm. His rise, his fall, his youth, and his death. That being said, I believe the main character in Star Trek, because it does span many generations,
Yes.
is the indomitable human spirit. If anything else, from the original series about exploration, what's out there amongst the stars, Next Generation, continuing that exploration, but very much about exploring the humanity that is out there amongst the stars. Deep Space Nine, it's about defending humanity and standing up for ourselves and taking a stand and saying, no more. This is our world. And not just ours, but the other alien races that are part of the Federation. By this point, humanity has spread its spirit to other places. And I think that's what Star Trek is all about. So no one character, even though we do focus on the captain and we do focus on the bridge crew, the main character of Star Trek is all of us.
That's an interesting take on that, and I can see that. Because of the, like you say, the many generations that it covers, multiple series that it covers, you can't just say there's any one main character. Obviously Kirk and then Picard, those are main characters of their individual series. But it paints a bigger picture once you put it all together. And that's wherein the humanity comes in. And I think, and you touched on it earlier with Gene Roddenberry, that was his rationale back when he was created was, let me cover risque subjects under the guise of sci-fi.
Absolutely.
And that ultimately is the core of what Star Trek is.
If society will not let you tell a story in reality, you have to make it a fiction. It's the only way we can accept it. And Gene Roddenberry knew that. He was very progressive, but at the same time, he knew he couldn't necessarily fight what was seen as social norms, but he knew that he could slip that in there because he was a very clever writer, a very clever creator, and he was a champion for civil rights in his day.
I guess he realized to a degree, and I'm sure others did at the time, racial divisions were hot.
Oh, man, they were at an all-time heat.
And if you want to kind of discuss that while covering it up, and as opposed to, say, a white man and a black woman, just make her green. And you're covering that, but making acceptable for TV by standards back then.
After the first season of the original series, Nichelle Nichols wanted to quit making Star Trek.
Yeah.
And Martin Luther King Jr. gave her a call, told her she was far too important. She represented something that they didn't have anywhere otherwise. She was a black woman that was a main character on a bridge of a starship. And she wasn't serving drinks or cleaning the place.
Yeah.
She was helping run the place.
And she
was an officer.
Yes, and she was very important for that. And that's, again, back to, Roddenberry and his way of thinking, he pushed the envelope in ways that not many people were able to do at the time. But
under the guise of science fiction.
Yes, which, and that's cool and all to do it, but it's unfortunate that that's the way it had to be done back then. But that's a topic for another show, I think. Fact is again, that pretty much is the underlying theme with Star Trek is the humanity and ultimately doing the right thing.
Well, if you look at Star Wars like it is the story of Anakin Skywalker, then you have to comment on the fact that it's very much about the heart of Anakin Skywalker. He lost faith in, for lack of a better word, humanity, even though there's a lot of alien races in both Star Trek and Star Wars.
Yes.
When I say humanity, I mean right and wrong, the what makes your sense of morality, your sense of ethics. Anakin Skywalker saw the worst of humanity when he was a child.
Yep.
And he didn't see anything but discipline and a strong hand when he joined the Jedi Order. And you're looking at a slave boy who wanted freedom and went right back into servitude. They weren't helping him. They were keeping an eye on him. Now, I think the debate can be made that the way Anakin Skywalker was treated contributed to who Anakin Skywalker became in Darth Vader.
Of
but,
course.
But I want to make my point is we watched him fall and rise again. You know, he wasn't born evil and he didn't die that way either. He had a change of heart. When he looked into his son's eyes, you know, he couldn't stand by and let his son be corrupted by the evil. I think it was less about Vader protecting his son from being killed by the Emperor and more about protecting his son from being corrupted by the Emperor as he was.
Yeah.
And it is a beautiful story. So if you look at it from that perspective, Star Trek and Star Wars is about the indomitable human spirit and how even though sometimes people can go, you know, down a dark path, they can always find the light back. And I think both Star Trek and Star Wars comment on that very well. You know, see Benjamin Sisko go down a dark road. We see Picard go down a dark road. The future's not solid in Star Trek. There's a lot of bent wheels. There's a lot of broken humanity. It isn't as pretty as it looks underneath the water as it does on the surface. There's a lot of insidiousness to Star Trek, whereas Star Wars, the audience is aware of the treachery, whereas the treachery in Star Trek sneaks up on you. We're presented with this next generation, original series, everything for Starfleet and humanity and the Federation is a beautiful vision of the future. But when we make it to Deep Space Nine, we realize that beneath just the slight surface of the Federation, things are not as beautiful as they appear.
And ultimately, you know, even in Star Wars, because, you know, when you have, you know, although it's original trilogy, episode 6, you have at the end, it's a new happy day and everybody's celebrating across the galaxy. Oh, yay, the Empire's destroyed. But by adding the sequels after the fact, clearly that's not the case. You know, Sidious is still around, whether it be himself or a clone or another clone or another clone. Still, the galaxy's being controlled by the same dude. But even if it wasn't him, it'd be somebody else, and then somebody else after that. I mean, the canon, well, not canon, but the lore in Star Wars, when the old extended universe novels and whatnot, you know, I've personally read a little bit of it, and I haven't read that much. And I know that the Sith have been around for thousands of years. There's always been 2 of them since that rule of 2 started. When you kill one, another one pops up.
Space Nazis and dark wizards are scary. Vader is probably the most recognizable fictional character in the world.
That's fair.
But what I find scary about the villains in Star Trek, or at least what I consider the villains in Star Trek, there's nothing scary than a zombie apocalypse, and the Borg are the zombie apocalypse in space.
There is another example of that very thing. The Reavers in Serenity. Even though we're not covering that right now, I like to mention that that's a zombie apocalypse in space too.
Yeah, it was like the Crazies or maybe 28 Days Later-esque zombies. Maybe even the remake of Dawn of the Dead. You know, the Borg have that slow-moving Romero collective mind. Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny. They're still after brains. You know, they're not necessarily after the human brain. You know, they're after technology. It's the horde mentality. You know, that's what's scary about the Borg. You encounter one Borg, one zombie, they're not very threatening. But when you have to beam over to the Borg ship to rescue your captain that's been taken by the Borg and changed into one of them, and you have to go on a rogue mission to go save him, and you're surrounded by hundreds of thousands of bio and technologically advanced zombies. Man, I don't know if I have that kind of metal. Them Starfleet boys are badass.
Uh, well, within any universe, you're gonna, as long as you're well written, you can have good characters and good guys and good bad guys as far as film and TV are concerned.
A hero is only as good as his villain, no matter what the story.
That's true, and I've heard that before, and it's very factual.
I mean, I think it's an old adage.
It is. It is. I think back to like old serial Western shows back in the day, and you might have a villain of the week. But the thing about Star Wars, George Lucas, he's a great creator, but he is a hack as a writer. And that is wherein lies the problem in Star Wars. The grand scale and the planets and the ships and all of the lore tied up in the greater universe that he created is fantastic. But then he writes Jar Jar Binks. And it's like, I hate sand. It gets everywhere. Like that shit.
That's funny.
Terrible.
That's one of the only things Anakin said that I actually found relatable.
and you're not wrong. But George Lucas is not a writer. He's a creator. And if he had understood that way back when, I mean, hell, most people consider Episode 5 the best Star Wars movie. Would you agree?
The average fan's going to say Empire Strikes Back. I thought you were asking my opinion.
No. Yes. Empire Strikes Back. Okay. Oddly enough, that was one of the few not directed by George. It was he did the first one, and it came out cool, but corny. Throw in Irving Kershner, and now you took this cool and made it more sleek. You get a little more actual drama out of it, not just throwaway lines and goofy moments.
So you're saying Lucas made a story and Irvin made an epic?
Well, he just did it well. He made it like a director would make. George Lucas was a creator. That's my whole point.
I believe that both Lucas and Roddenberry brought a mindset to the genre that hasn't necessarily been thought about before. Up until those two had come along, aliens were always seen as just the bad guys. The invading aliens are going to come. They're going to take over our planet. Gene and George both saw that aliens weren't necessarily evil. They were just different.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely the fact. Because, I mean, in Star Wars, all of your major characters, except for a few, are humans. That's obviously easier for the filmmakers. So your main characters, you don't have to spend as much money on your costume, wardrobe, special effects, makeup, so on and so forth. And they even have a throwaway line about it. I forget which movie about it. I think it's episode 1. It's a credit to your race. It's Watto that says it, talking about little Anakin and how good he is at pod racing. But the aliens still matter. Yoda is one of the main characters. But still, it boils down to the fact that, obviously it's just easier for filmmakers to use humans as main characters. I mean, Star Trek's doing the same thing.
The thing I like best about watching an alien race, whether it be in Star Wars or Star Trek, is when you're watching these alien races and you're seeing their culture and their language and just how different they are from humanity. It's when you see the similarities between us and these aliens that make the show beautiful. There's a lot of human in Klingons. There's a lot of human in Romulans. There is an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. It's called The Chase. All the aliens are basically in a game against each other to find what they believe is the blueprints to a weapon or a ship or some kind of energy source that would be, efficient, cheap energy, for everyone. They come to find out at the end of the episode that it's none of those things. It's a simple message from an alien race that seeded the primordial oceans of every alien race that we see on Star Trek, letting us know that all of the alien races and the humans came from the same place. So there is a lot of them in us. And that's what makes it beautiful. That's why Star Wars and the Ewoks, they have a society. They live together. The Gungans, for all the flack they get, they have a society. They live together. They have personalities. They have wants and dreams. They have fears. The Gungans are afraid for their people and their children and their livelihood just as much as the Naboo. It's the same in Star Trek, Deep Space Nine. The humans and the Bajorans and the Vulcans, they all share the fear of the Dominion, but they also have hopes and dreams and
matter of point. Regardless of the alien type and what sci-fi medium it came from, it's all just a version of humanity.
So whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars, we're all just trying to make our way through the galaxy.
Bingo. That's Wes.
And he's Corey, and we're the Triflemen.